What is the one thing in this life that you love? Think about it for a moment. What is the one thing that you cannot live without? No, I'm not talking about God or the church or the Bible. What is that one thing, that one person, that one collection of items that you cannot live without? You love them. You desire them. You seek after them. Think about that thing and hold to that thought for just a moment. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Burns and thank you for joining me on Walking with the Word. We are today looking at the idea of love one another. This idea of that you and I can love each other, we can be what we need, we can understand love. Now I ask you to think about that one thing that you just can't live without, that one person you just can't live without, that one concept that you can't live without. Put it back in your mind. Now what I want you to do is going to be very difficult. I want you to imagine that it's gone. It's not here anymore. You can't talk to them. You can't hear from them. They can't do anything for you. You can't do anything for them. That one thing that you love, there's nothing that can bring it back. What goes across your mind? You see, and now we have in our minds the definition of what it means to love. All of this has been brought about by the ideas of John 13:34 through 35, where Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another." Love is a powerful, motivating force. It is a care. It is a compassion. It's something we need. I want to look at three things today. I want to look at loving speech, loving opportunity, and then loving goodness in our lesson today to hopefully give us some ideas of things we can put into our lives that have to do with love. Let's talk about speech. Now, number one, I want us to understand that the things we say matter. The things you say matter. The things I say matter. But also remember this, the things that we hear others say, they matter. The things we put into our lives, the things we bring into our lives, whether they are intentional, as in we sat down to hear these things, or to participate with these things, or whether they were incidentals. We just happened to be somewhere and something was said or something was done and it came into our lives. You see, what goes into our lives matters. Now, I know there are some things that we cannot control. We cannot control the incidentals. And sometimes, even on the intentional things that we set out to do, we cannot control what someone else says or does. So don't hear me say that if you hear something that you shouldn't, that was your fault, because it not always is. Now, sometimes it is our fault. When we know we should not be hearing it and we know what's getting ready to happen, but yet we're interested in it the same way. That's what I'm talking about there. When we intentionally bring these things in, it causes problems in our lives. So what I'm understanding and what you're understanding is we know that what goes in is going to come out. But let me ask you this. Of all the things that we hear in our world today, the things that our children hear at school, the things that we hear out and about in our days, the things we intentionally bring into our lives, the things that are incidentals, what are those things? They're choices. They're choices. You see, we live in a rather unusual time. And what I mean by that is we live in a politically motivated world. Now, I'm not here preaching today about politics or teaching about politics. The only time I'm going to mention these two words is right now. I'm not talking about Republicans. I'm not talking about Democrats. We live in a politically motivated world. Everything has become political. And on any spectrum, everything is so far away from what it actually is. And we live in a world where when something is said, everyone's offended. When something is said, someone is excluded. We live in a strange world where speech is in this kind of odd area right now. But there is something we can know about speech. Loving speech. James 3:10 through 11. Out of the same mouth proceeds blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? You see, what we say, not just what we hear, what we say matters. I love the writer here, James. He says, of the same mouth. In other words, he's talking about mine. He's talking about yours. He's talking about those he originally wrote to. When you go and read that in the book of James. And he says, some of you give blessings. And we should. We should be helps. But he says, some of you give cursings. You're a hurt. He's saying some of us, you're trying to be a help, but then you turn around and be a hurt at the same time. And he says, of the same mouth, these two things come out. Then he uses this phrase, my brethren. We know who he's talking to. He's talking to Christians. He's talking to those covered by the blood of Christ. My brethren, these things ought not be so. And then he uses an illustration of which we all can understand. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? The answer is no. But we sit there and we try to go, well, maybe that could happen if. No, that's not how it works. You see, when James was writing in this particular scene and we're reading these words, we understand what James is saying. A spring is not going to send forth water that's fresh and good and desirable. And then the same opening, the same water gives something that's repulsive, that's bitter, that I don't want. That's the power of the mouth, of speech. Think about our mouths for just a moment. In our homes, in the church, among our relationships and friendships, and wherever we may be. What does your mouth bring and what does mine? Does it give blessings? Or does it give cursings out of the same mouth? That's what I'm talking about with loving speech. If we're going to love one another as we should, there should be no backbiting. We know what that word means. There should be no secret talking. We know what that means. There should be no two-facedism. I call it two-mouthism because your face isn't two-faced, it's your mouth. It speaks good here and it speaks evil here of the same person. That's not what he says. He says loving speech. Now, Jesus shows us what it means to have loving speech. It means to tell the truth. Now, that doesn't mean that the truth is always going to be pleasant, but it does mean that we're going to be open, we're going to be honest, and we're going to be compassionate in the things that we say. And if we're going to love one another, we've got to have a loving speech. In the second place today, we need to have a loving opportunity. The book of Romans, in Romans 14:1 and 14:4, tells us about this. Receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to dispute over doubtful things. Down to verse 4, who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. What I mean by loving opportunity is this. We need to find a way to be united together. Now, here's the purpose of this. We need to take personal feelings, personal relationships, personal ideas, personal thinking. We need to get rid of it. I read a Facebook post, and boy, doesn't that sound good already? I read a Facebook post, and it was a man who was giving his ideas, and he says, this is what I think that men should be if they're going to work in this category. And I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to create any problems. It was no one at Findlay, no one in Sparta, just happened to be something I read. And he says, here's what this Bible passage said. He says, and that's true. He says, but I think we also need to, and there was the problem. There was the problem. I think we also need to. You see, I was reading a book recently. Someone at Findlay brought me some books of their family members. And I have been reading a book from Foy E. Wallace. And in that book, he's talking about text and translations. And he's talking about how man will take the Bible when it's being translated from Hebrew or from Greek, and he will insert. He will insert what's in his mind. Not just taking the word and saying, here's this word, this is what it means. Here's this word, this is what it means. But here's this word, and this is what I've always believed it to mean. You see, there may be some things that we're uneasy about, unsure about, but we need to have the opportunity to come together. You see, if we love one another, we're not going to fight about the things of which there is sometimes no answer. We need to have this idea of being people who love the opportunity. But let's come to a conclusion with this: loving goodness. Hebrews 10:23 through 25 or 24. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works. Loving goodness. I love the beginning of this in Hebrews 10:23. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. Why? Why can we know that we can have a confidence that nothing can shake it? For he who promised, listen to this, for he who promised is faithful. Now I know something about myself, and I'm going to share it with you now. But I also think that I know something about you, and I won't share that with everybody, but I'll share this about me. Have you ever promised you would do something, and then you forgot? Or maybe it no longer was convenient for you and you didn't get it done. Well, I was just busy. You see, sometimes we break our promises. God does not break His promises. God does not turn upon truth. We can have and we can hold with surety, hold fast, the hope of the gospel. God does save. But notice what He says in the last part in verse 24. Because He is faithful, let us, He turns it from God to man, let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works. Two things I want you to see. Love. Not just acceptance, but love. Care. Sacrifice. Compassion. Servitude. Willingness. Responsibility. You see, love is not a mystical feeling of which we have. Love really is a responsibility in action. He says we're stirring up love. Why? Because God is faithful. We stir up love where? One another. Consider one another to stir up love for one another. But then this, number 2. Let's consider one another to stir up love and good works. I want to ask you this, and I think this is important. What have you done recently that was good? That was good. I'm not talking about what's significantly large. What have you done that was good? See, that's what we need to worry about. Sometimes I believe, this is just a thought, that we worry about these big things, and we want to do big things. But why don't we major in the little things? Hold that door. Say thank you. When you see something needs to be done, just do it. Don't ask. Just good things. You see, what would it look like if we had loving goodness? We loved one another. We cared for one another. We worked with one another. We served one another. Boy, that's impressive. And what's interesting to me in Hebrews 10:23 and 24 is he's talking about us. You see, loving speech, loving opportunity, loving goodness, all brings us to this idea of who we are and what we are as we consider one another, as we love one another. May we take these things and find things that we can do so that we can be people who walk with the Word every day of our lives.